The week's end top stories at NBR. Annual inflation in the year to the end of June jumps to 3.3%. The company that owns winemaker Villa Maria owes its bankers $212 million. The majority owner of winemaker Sacred Hill fails to stop receivership, and there's more coming right up. Kia ora and welcome to NBR This Week. We start with a wrap of the end of the week's top business stories from the authority in New Zealand business news since 1970, nbr.co.nz. Then we'll take a look back at the top NBR Today stories from the past week. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks so much for watching. Annual inflation in the year to the end of June has jumped to 3.3%, more than double the 1.5% recorded in the March year. Statistics New Zealand said this was the biggest annual increase in nearly 10 years and was driven by higher prices for new housing and petrol. It comes just 2 days after the Reserve Bank announced its government bond buying program would stop on Monday as it starts to withdraw monetary policy stimulus. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee said there would be near-term spikes in headline CPI inflation in the June and September quarters. It believed these would reflect factors that were either one-off in nature or temporary, although it signalled ongoing inflationary pressures were stronger. The company that owns winemaker Villa Maria owes its bankers $212 million, the first receivers report says. In May, Brendan Gibson and Neil Jackson of Calibre Partners were appointed receivers to FFWL Limited, the 100% shareholder of Villa Maria Estate. FFWL is owned by the winery's founder, NBR lister Sir George Fistenich. The receivership does not affect Villa Maria's ongoing business, which continues to operate and trade profitably. Villa Maria and its overseas subsidiaries were not in receivership. At the time receivers were appointed to the holding company, Gibson told NBR Rabobank, as security trustee for the banks involved, including itself and ANZ, had appointed the receivers. He would not specify the value of the claims, saying those would be made public with the receivers' reports within the next 2 months. The majority owner of winemaker Sacred Hill, David Mason, has failed to stop the receivership sale of his business. In a judgment released to media on Friday by Auckland High Court Justice Feroz Jagos, Mason's interlocutory application to extend the deadline for Property Law Act notices issued by Westpac to July 30 in order to secure a more favourable deal was dismissed. The judge said he found no reason to intervene, with Mason's last-minute plea having no foundation beyond his optimism. Dovetail Ventures, a full-service venture studio with offices in Sydney and Auckland, is raising an Australian $10 million fund for companies it develops through the studio. The company, founded in 2014 by Australians Nick Franston and Ash Fogelberg, helps build startups from inception, working alongside the founders to help them grow and get more funding. It began working with Afterpay in 2017 when the company had less than 40 employees, and the co-founders were looking for a digital product development partner to help build and scale their mobile and web apps. The fund, being raised over the next 4 to 5 months, will be used for early-stage funding from seed through to Series B in 15 or so of the best companies that go through the venture studio. Dovetail is sector agnostic, though has experience in fintech, software as a service, and marketplaces. Genesis Energy has urgently sought to stop fuel retailer Z Energy from using the colour orange in its new electricity fuel bundle brand, a colour the power giant has trademarked and claims is synonymous with its identity. The listed companies on Thursday appeared in the High Court at Auckland in a first call hearing of Genesis' interim injunction application against Z Energy. What the litigation was about wasn't discussed before Justice Sally Fitzgerald, with most of the talk focused on finding a date sooner than November when hearings were next available. A one-day fixture was eventually set down for the end of August. In a statement to NBR, Genesis Energy said it was concerned customers could confuse its brand for Z Energy's entry into the retail electricity market, Z Electric, and had filed suit to stop its trademarked use of orange. Those are our top stories as we head into the weekend, the full versions of which, along with all our breaking business news, columns and opinion, are at nbr.co.nz right now. You're watching NBR This Week, a brief look back at the week's top stories from our daily video news brief program, NBR Today. On Monday, juicy receivers reveal likely shortfall of $44 million. More than $27 million has been paid to the former banker of beleaguered campervan rental and tourism operator Juicy Group, but it's still unlikely to be fully repaid. Juicy, formerly owned by the NBR rich list Alp family, went into receivership last year after COVID-19 had an unprecedented and devastating impact on the business. The group's first receivers report in January this year showed there would likely be a shortfall on the $44 million ASB Bank was owed as secured creditor, with millions of dollars in unsecured creditor claims also unlikely to be paid. On Friday, the receiver's second report for the company said the bank was still owed a further $11.6 million, which the receivers said was unlikely to be repaid in full. As such, close to $3 million owed to unsecured creditors would also be left unpaid. It's NBR This Week, the week's top stories from our daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. From Tuesday, an imminent interest rate hike on the horizon. The failure of recent efforts to cool the housing market appear to be setting the scene for an imminent interest rate hike. The Real Estate Institute of New Zealand said today median residential property prices across New Zealand increased by 28.7% from $637,000 in June 2020 to $820,000 in June 2021. However, monthly growth eased slightly compared to earlier in the year, with the latest median price up just 0.3% on $817,500 in May. Rianne's chief executive, Jen Beard, said house prices were continuing to defy expectations, with all regions hiking up in June and 5 regions posting outright records. Beard said the data pointed to how important it was to address housing supply issues. This is NBR This Week, the past week's top 5 business stories from NBR Today. From Wednesday, EROAD's near $200 million acquisition of telematics software company Cortex. The near $200 million acquisition of telematics software company Cortex by transport logistics company EROAD is seen as a boost for both companies. Cortex CEO Selwyn Pellet told NBR there isn't a better place we can put our technology into than EROAD. There's not a better place we can put our shareholders into than EROAD. And there's not a better place we can put our employees into than EROAD. Cortex delivers compliance and fleet management solutions to more than 60,000 connected vehicles in the construction, mixed fleet and waste and recycling industries. It has offices on either side of the Tasman and in North America. EROAD will pay $157.7 million upfront and $30.6 million more in financial year 2023, provided Cortex meets certain performance milestones. It's NBR This Week, the top business stories from our daily video news bulletin, NBR Today. I'm Paul Brennan. From Thursday, an admitted miscategorisation of a $3.3 million wage subsidy repayment. The Ministry of Social Development has admitted it miscategorised a $3.3 million wage subsidy repayment Air New Zealand made last year as non-voluntary. According to documents obtained by the NBR in an Official Information Act request, MSD originally said the airline, the largest claimant under the government's wage subsidy scheme, was requested to repay $3.3 million of the $116.9 million it claimed. However, Air New Zealand Chief People Officer Nikki Dine said the airline agreed with the Ministry of Social Development at the outset that Air New Zealand would do a reconciliation process at the end of each wage subsidy period and would return any money that they'd not been able to pass on to their employees in accordance with the subsidy rules. This is NBR This Week. Now we're up to Friday's top story. Liquidators are poised to file a $57 million legal claim against expat businessman Eric Watson, adding to a pile of legal action, including insider trading charges filed by the US Securities and Exchange Commission this month. Watson's Cullen Group of companies was placed in liquidation in December 2019 after losing a $51.5 million tax case with the IRD. In their fourth report, liquidators Vivian Fatupaito and Luke Norman of KPMG said Watson owed Cullen $57 million that they had entered without prejudice discussions with representatives of Mr. Watson, which have not resulted in any outcome, and proceedings against Mr. Watson have been drafted and are ready to be filed after finalising a logistical matter regarding service of the relevant documents. You've been watching our review of the week's top 5 NBR Today stories. You can find the full versions of those stories and more, along with all our daily breaking business news columns and opinion at nbr.co.nz right now. Saturday at NBR, in Fact or Fiction, Grant Walker and Brent Edwards discuss the week in politics, while on Sunday, Brent Sheether's On the Money column looks at investing in list property trusts versus direct commercial property investment. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks for watching NBR This Week. Have a great weekend. I look forward to being with you again from Monday on NBR Today.